welcome to this week's episode of Not D&D. It is now 2024, and this is our first official episode back of Not D&D. Thanks for joining us, and a big hello and welcome to Ian Stuart Sharpe, who is joining us today. Ian, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you. Delighted to be here and delighted to be kicking off 2024 in what approximates style.
Exactly. So as I mentioned before, we are recording, if you're looking in the chat, if you're watching live, we are recording the interview live. So if you have any questions or any thoughts, feelings or opinions about the show or any questions for Ian, pop them in the chat and we can answer them live for you. And as mentioned, we will be talking about When the Wolf Comes this week, which I'm very excited to learn more about. The game is powered by Shadow of the Demon Lord. Obviously, last year we had Robert on to talk about Shadow of the Weird Wizard. So that could be a little bit of context for you there. And Ian's also had an interview with us on EM World last year where we had a written article about When the Wolf Comes. So if you prefer reading instead of listening or watching, there's many ways you can learn about this game. But before we jump in and talk about the game, Ian, I'm very nosy, and so I'm going to talk about you a little bit, if that's okay. So the question I always ask guests that come on is, what's your first memory of playing tabletop RPGs? Like, what's your history with gaming?
So, a long time ago. So you can tell by my accent, perhaps, that I'm from the same sceptred isle as yourself. I'm just over in British Columbia right now, making the recording difference in terms of time a bit more interesting. But so I grew up in the UK, grew up in Norfolk, which for international listeners is the little bump that's closest to Scandinavia, which is probably why it got invaded by Vikings quite so often and was originally part of the Danelaw, which was the part of the UK that was occupied. My first brush with RPGs is kind of related to the scene that was emerging in the 80s in the UK. So there was a lot of stuff with White Dwarf, there was a lot of stuff with Games Workshop, those early Warhammer titles. I used to cut out little pieces of cardboard and move them round for wargaming. I used to then buy Space Marines for 40k gaming. But specifically with RPGs, I had the introduction was that boxed set in the UK that was the red box of D&D, basic D&D.
Classic.
And it had in it a kind of adventure, a pre-built adventure where a group of people wandered in. These typical wander in with exploring the mine, and there were kobolds and rats and carrion crawlers, because that's every kind of starting adventure. I ran that as DM for my well, they were kind of all 12 and 13, whatever year that was in high school. I ran that for a kind of D&D gaming group of which 35 people attended. So I didn't know enough to take that core adventure of 4 kobolds and a carrion crawler and expand it. So I just let all 35 people wander in, completely massacre the kobolds in nanoseconds, and so the whole thing was a bit of a bust. But that was my, still stuck in my memory of just quite how appalled and bored all of the people that I invited to that D&D club were, and how inept my my early DMing was. But that was a good, I don't know, 35 years or so ago.
Amazing. So do you like to think you've progressed a little bit with your GM style since then?
just a tad. Although, I mean, I was talking with the gaming group that I play with this weekend, and they were, some of them are younger, and they said, when you first started playing, were you as, kind of incompetent as we are? Because they tend to do, like most gaming groups, they get into all kinds of scrapes and situations that
of course
they have to find their way out of with ingenious ruses, plot stratagems and ploys. But I said to them, when I was growing up, I remember full well that my gaming group did all kinds of incompetent things as well. There's a good friend of mine, Simon Adcock, who now lives in Australia, and I have very vivid memories of him fireballing a whole town of villagers,
Right.
a whole kind of parade of villagers, a whole kind of village fete, because he was convinced they were all werewolves and he needed to get in a kind of first strike. So he's more
Right.
kind of the George Bush school of role playing, where you just get in that first strike with your fireball.
Get in there, do the war crimes against civilians.
Exactly. And so those were my formative years, and I think it's only gone downhill since.
Only gone downhill since. Okay, well, I mean, let's dig into it a little bit, how it's gone downhill. So we're here to talk about when the wolf comes. So to give a little bit of context it says a Vikingverse role-playing game. Could you give us a bit of context of what the Vikingverse is?
Sure, be delighted to. So the Vikingverse is a series of alternate history novels and comics where I tell the story of a parallel timeline, as if the world never Christianized, as if the Vikings won all the battles that they were ever engaged in, and so the world unfurls in a very different way, instead of there being a kind of mother church and the kind of rule of Catholicism and the English language becoming prevalent everywhere as the great British Empire spans across the globe, spreading that kind of church and state outlook. What I do in the Vikingverse is imagine a pagan present, whereby Norse is the main language, where pagan traditions and beliefs perpetuate all the way through to the present day, and where the tagline is that the Vikings rule the seas and the stars, because the present that we live in, we've sent men to the moon, and in this retelling of mythology, the 9 homeworlds of Norse mythology, the Nuaheimar, they exist as exoplanets, and the Norse of the Vikingverse are able to step between those worlds, and kind of reshape all of that Norse mythology that we know from people like Neil Gaiman and, dare I say it, the Marvel movies, and recast it in a setting that people can play through. So the shorthand for it really is, as per the expansion I've recently released, it's all about space Vikings.
Nice, love that. That's great. That's a great succinct way to say it. Space Vikings. But the Vikingverse is a really big and expanded setting. There's lots of comics, there's lots of books. It's a big universe to kind of explore. When did you get started with that? How did that come about, being a big thing that you do?
So it came about during my own personal Ragnarok.
Okay.
So Ragnarok, for people who don't know, is the twilight of the gods, the doom of Norse mythology. It is where Odin is swallowed by the Fenrir wolf, where Thor staggers to his death because of having been poisoned by Jormungandr, the world serpent, and where the world of Midgard comes to a fiery end on the sword of Surt. So I've always liked that idea. There's something deeply poetic about the way the Vikings and the Norse faced their fate. The reason why the RPG, incidentally, is called When the Wolf Comes is there's a phrase in the sagas which basically says, Odin says to his interlocutor, he says, the Einherjar, the people he brings to Valhalla, the fallen warriors that he's summoning for this last titanic fight with the wolf and the Jotnar, the giants of Norse mythology. He says, even with all the people that he's brought to him, even though all of those fallen warriors throughout history, they will seem too few when the wolf comes. and that's the title, right? When the Wolf Comes is, all of these fallen heroes, these mythical warriors, will seem too few when they face that final battle. So the question was about my when I started all of this, how it all came about. It started because of my own personal Ragnarok. I wasn't quite facing down a wolf, but we did have Brexit. I wasn't, despite the fact that I'm over in Canada, I like to call it Brexile, where I'm here, because it's difficult to return with the economy as it is. Donald Trump had just been elected. I had a company that I ran, because I work in tech. I had a company of my own go under, and so everything was going wrong. And I thought, what if Marvel's now coined that with their What If multiverse show, but at the time I thought, what if we could just have a do-over? What if you could start again? What if you could just unpick the bits that went wrong and rewrite history? And then from that I thought, well, Odin would be pretty pissed off knowing what had happened to him, being played by Anthony Hopkins or Ian McShane, and because this was a god that dominated European belief systems for thousands of years at least, and now trivialized the shadow of himself. I thought, well, what would he do for the chance to unpick his own Ragnarok, his own inevitable demise? And so that's where the Vikingverse comes about. It's Odin says, okay, well, I'm not particularly happy with just going quietly into the night, into the Wolf's Moor. I'm going to change history. I'm going to rewrite things. I'm going to defy the Norns. The Norns are the three maidens who twine fate and decree what's going to happen. He said, I'm going to defy them. I'm going to rewrite history. I'm going to, instead of letting the Vikings give up the Danelaw and lose to Alfred the Great in our own history, and surrender at the siege of Paris and give it away for silver, or stop the fight for Miklagard or Constantinople as we know it. All of these tipping points, these turning points in our own history that could have gone either way, he tips them towards the Vikings. He tips them so that they prevail in all of those scenarios. And so Alfred the Great doesn't prevail over the Vikings. The Norman conquest never happens because there is a strong, united kingdom of Danish. And the Normans themselves were anyway, descendants of Rollo. They were all a few generations away from being Vikings. So you go back far enough and you can rethread all of this history and create a very plausible Norse alternative history. And that's what the books, that's what the comics, and that's ultimately what the RPG does, is tells the story so that characters can play as characters inspired by Norse mythology in as authentic a Norse setting as possible, but not just running around in the Dark Ages or the Viking Age, but brought up to this modern standard where history is unfurled very differently. And instead of typing on a Latin keyboard with your QWERTYs, you're typing in the Futhark with runes. So that's you can imagine how that pervades every aspect of life. From you don't wander down to St. Swithin's or St. Bartholomew's to worship on Christmas Day. You go down to the local temple to worship for winter nights and for Yule, etc., etc., etc. And we can unpick that as much as you like, but that's the broad strokes that the books and the comics tell that story of a civilization.
Yes, love that. So obviously with the books and the comics, you have this amazing setting, and with any good story, I think it lends itself to role-playing games because people go, I want to make a character and walk around in that world. So I'm assuming because you have a history with playing role-playing games yourself, so was that just a natural idea? You're like, I have this amazing setting, let's make other people, let other people walk around in it. How did that happen?
Yeah, it was, and certainly the books started, and then we did a few Kickstarters. We did the comics, and then we also did this book, which you're listeners won't be able to see, but it's called Old Norse for Modern Times,
Mhm.
which has got phrases in it like "these are not the droids you're looking for," or
Yeah.
the I used to be an adventurer like you, then I took an arrow from the knee to the knee. That's from
Classic.
Skyrim, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I just translated all of those into Old Norse because it's funny, right? And
Yeah.
just no one's actually going to use it. I mean, the tagline for the book is, never be lost for words again with this book of lost words. But in that, I started to put the phrases for like roll a dice 20, roll for initiative, make a strength saving throw. You may call me Dungeon Master, but just translated all of those to Old Norse. And
Okay.
that was the real tipping point into When the Wolf Comes, because I was playing a lot of D&D at that point through the pandemic. I was running lots of gaming groups.
Sure.
And we thought that was funny, these memorable quotes, right? Like, do I look to be in a gaming mood? Which is right. So you translate all of that into Old Norse. And so people started to throw this around the table. And from there, I thought, okay, well, I've got all of these people playing elves and dwarves around my table, but that's so much of D&D and so much of mythology and the stuff that we do in RPGs is based on Norse mythology, is ripped off of Norse mythology. Your listeners and viewers, and you might know, Tolkien, he created his own masterful universe, and he was doing so to create an Old English mythology. But in doing so, he stole from its forebears the Old Norse stuff. So Gandalf and all of the dwarves, Thorin Oakenshield, they're all names that are literally cribbed from the Old Norse sources. Same, and he was a fantastic linguist as well. And so as he's creating his elves and his dwarves, he stole from the Old Norse the Alpha and the Dverga. And so we've got in our RPG lexicon, we've got these things, pointy-eared elves and short, stumpy dwarves with temperament problems. And they've come from this Norse tradition. But what I wanted to do as I got into it, because the Vikingverse was all about being authentic and trying to use Old Norse where I could, and trying to not have horned helmets, and trying to retell things plausibly. But elves weren't pointy-eared forest dwellers. They were demons of death. The Dvergar and the Alpha are always mixed up, and it's very difficult to tell them apart. The sources are very scant on detail. But there's things that you can tease out and differentiate. Dark elves, the Doc Alpha, that were referred to by Snorri Sturluson, who was our go-to source for a lot of Norse mythology. He lived several hundred years after all of these stories were defunct, several hundred years after the Norse had Christianized. And so he's looking at it through this lens all the time of Christianity. So light elves and dark elves were probably influenced, if not entirely swayed, by Christian views. So strip all of that away, because Christianity doesn't exist. Go back to the 8th century, the 9th century sources, use those. What are Alpha? What are Dvergar? What are Jotnar? Jotnar, the giants of Norse myth that Thor is always fighting. And so I wanted to strip it all back to that. Strip it all back so that we have as much kind of rootedness as we can, using the linguistics, using the history, using the runes, and then fling it back into the future. So elves aren't pointy ears. They are still demons of death that are resurrected in the hour of need of Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil, the world's tree, brings these spirits to life, brings them back in. And Dvergar are automatons still born of oil and soil and the bones of worlds, but they're kind of truculent, slightly pissed off versions of Marvin the android, right? There's and so
right.
But because that's true to their roots, and that's where I've tried to go to with all of the paths, all of the
Mhm.
origins, all of the sagas that we tell, as adventures. I've tried to make them as plausibly Norse with that sci-fi spin as possible, because I was bored with playing pointy-eared, do-gooding elves with bows.
That's fair. Is that well? That kind of leans into my next question. I think it answers it a little bit already. Well, I think because you had this amazing setting, and so you're like, great, let's make an RPG. The most popular tabletop RPG is Dungeons and Dragons, as we know. But you decided to use not D&D to as the system to kind of power this game. You chose Shadow of the Demon Lord. What made you think that system was the correct fit for this style of storytelling?
Oh, well, what Rob Schwalb has done with Shadow of the Demon Lord and the rules that he's put together is just so eloquent and so elegant. It just having played an awful lot of D&D and a lot of Warhammer Fantasy roleplay, and experimented with other stuff like Paranoia. I don't know. You look at what Rob did, as how he put together things, the sheer storytelling impetus of the way that the paths go together, and how you can build and grow a character and not be just confined to it. It used to bug me playing D&D where you were a paladin or you were a bard, and you were a cleric and you were stuck there and that's what you did. Or you could multi-class as long as you had the right kind of dexterity or strength, and it became so cumbersome and unwieldy. D&D began to feel like a straitjacket, and it then began to feel, as more and more supplements piled on and more origins were available, and suddenly you could become a Leonin or a Triton or something like that. It was whoa, everything but the kitchen sink is being thrown in here. This is so generic as to have lost touch with its rootedness in fantasy. And so I think what Rob's rules do, his mechanics do, is give anyone a really easy on-ramp to play. And I think that then as a framework, they give creators like me a really simple way to pick up a rule set and apply this new skin, this new veneer, this new approach. And it's not so my stuff isn't exactly the same as Shadow of the Demon Lord. There are different rules, there's additional rules, but as a framework and a bedrock, it's just leagues above anything else. D&D, very middle of the road, and I gave up Phil Collins and Genesis a long time ago.
Fair enough. So Shadow of the Demon Lords really, like you're saying, leans into the kind of characters that you're having, because these characters, the origins you were kind of talking a bit about, it's not your classic kind of fantasy, because it's looking at it from a completely different lens. One of the things I really want to talk about as well is magic and kind of technology in the game, because something really interesting you've done here, because obviously Norse mythology we always think of in historical old kind of magic sort of sense when we kind of picture it, but because you've set it in an alternate timeline where it's futuristic and there's things happening, there's a really nice blend. And I think you wrote somewhere that magic, spirits and technology are virtually indistinguishable. Could you talk a little bit about that and how that works in the game?
Yeah, so one of the things with the Norse and pagan beliefs in general, and it applies to a lot of kind of animist cultures, is that they have a lot of ancestor worship. They believe in land spirits. They believe that everything has a consciousness, right? So I think it was important, given that kind of blood-drenched rituals and arcane curses and the Norse terms for magic, like spacecraft and Seither and Gand and Galda, again in the same ways that Tolkien gave us elves and dwarves, these are the words that gave us the the magical lexicon that we use. I know people talk about fireballs and lightning bolts and illusion spells now, but the basis of the witchcraft that underpinned all of that goes back to those shamanistic Norse traditions that were very much part of the English tradition as well, right? We had things in the UK like hedge riders. They were the heg test, and that's where hag comes from. Words like hag, and again, you can trace all of these things etymologically, and that's the fascinating journey in itself. Wizard is another Old Norse word. It just means wise hard, in the same way as that we watch the movie every Christmas, Die Hard, right? This was just wise hard. You were the most wise guy. You were wise hard. That became wizard, and so these notions of the cunning folk, of the wise, of the learned, of people with knowledge, that was the basis of old witchcraft or druidcraft, or however you like to call it, but it was the basis of the magical tradition of the Norse, of the North and of the Norse. And so I tried to keep that and rethread it. So one of the things I do is to make it akin to science and knowledge, because if everything is conscious, and again, this might sound a bit new age to some listeners, but a lot of people do believe that trees are sentient, or that you can commune with spirits, or that they have a spirit animal. All of those ideas come from the Norse. The notion of the spirit animal. You had something called a fylgja, and if you've read Philip Pullman's stuff and the Subtle Knife and those books, they have fetches or familiars, and it all comes from this Norse concept of this having this animal fylgja, spirit that represented you through life. So the notion that these spirits suffuse you and around you, and that you are supported by your ancestors, and that your very luck, your hamingja, is the embodiment of your lineage and your integrity. I wanted to put all of that in there. And so the magical system is the things that we commonly associate with the Norse. It is runes. It is the Völva with her staff, the Wandwed, who was one of the great seers or seeresses of Norse culture. All of that permeates through, but it's all given that Norse spin and that futuristic spin as well. So people aren't weaving magic or dealing with the colors of chaos or whatever, as you see in other systems. Again, we try to tie it directly to this idea of communicating with the spirits. You do so sometimes through old techniques, ancient techniques, and you do so sometimes with technology. And if I can find it quickly, I'll just skip to one of the phrases that I use to kind of most here it is. So one of the things is I like to translate or retrofit Norse names, English names, into their Old Norse. So William Shakespeare, for example, becomes Wilhelm Shakagir, right? That's what his name would be if he was Norse. Charles Darwin would be Carl Devan. Old Norse and English are so close, you can recognize a lot of the transitions. And so Arthur C. Clarke in Old Norse becomes Arnthor C. Clacker. That's just what his name would be if you turned it into Old Norse. And so one of the jokes I make is that the third law of Arnthor C. Clacker is that any sufficiently advanced Galder is indistinguishable from technology. Just turning that old phrase round, because that's really the ethos here, is that technology and magic and knowledge, all kind of the same thing. It's how you present it. Magicians are often about the presentation, and so I've tried to make it again authentic. I use Old Norse names throughout, so that it kind of the book acts as a language course as well, of sorts. And magic is important, but technology is important as well.
Okay, great. And people that are used to playing or have played Shadow of the Demon Lord before and know the system, what sort of different kind of characters and origins are they going to be playing in when the wolf comes?
So we start off with the common or garden manfolk, right? Because every that's the kind of starting point, the baseline for everything. And then there are the Eddaic races. The Eddaic races are drawn from the Eddas, the classic sagas that we anyone who's touched Norse mythology will know. And they are the Alpha, the Dvergar, the Jotnar, so in today's vernacular, the elves, the dwarves, the giants. But then I've always liked this notion of the half races, right? Because you've always got these half elves. But what is a half elf when it's bred not with a man, but an elf dwarf hybrid, for example? And looking at those main four groupings and how they interplay gave me a kind of Venn diagram of how I could create other races from Norse mythology. So you have the sons of Ivaldi, you have the Jarnvidja. The Jarnvidja are the Ironwoodites, the children of the Ironwood, and they're effectively sentient animals brought to life by technology. The sons of Ivaldi are, in mythology, are the people who create Odin's spear Gungnir, who give Sif her long golden hair, and they're kind of these Smith-like figures, and I've recast them as kind of cyborg warrior smiths, and so they're in there. There's the Wains. The Wains are a race that have been deseeded and persecuted, but they are the Tree Touch. They are people who've traveled with Yggdrasil, and so they're half human, half plant. And so there's plenty of there's 10 origins there altogether. Again, all drawn from the pages of the sagas, but brought to life in this kind of slightly futuristic but as authentic as a way as possible. And then the paths themselves, you go through, whereas Rob and Shadow of the Demon Lord have more traditional paths, like the path of the warriors and the magicians. I've gone for the Norse archetypes. So instead of clerics, I have godsmen, who would be Githi or Gidya in Norse. My warriors are oathsworn. My magicians is the path of the wise. I've focused on the path of the Skald. Skalds being the kind of warrior poets of Norse society. So that becomes integral. I play around a lot with honor and shame, because it was an honor and shame based society as opposed to alignment, because lawful good, chaotic evil, all of that stuff drives me insane. You are held to account in this game by the judgment of your peers, of your society. You earn your place in society at the end of the world, at the edges of the world, in the Doom of Ragnarök, by supporting your fellow man or choosing not to, and that gives you honor or shame. It's a sliding scale. And so that really encourages you to either struggle hard like the Norse did in the face of their inevitable fate, knowing that today is a good day to die, or to turn your back on all of that and throw caution to the wind, earn shame, and become an outlaw and live your life on the margins of society, persecuted with a veritable death sentence laid down against you. So it has to be black and white, because this is the end of the world. There's no nuances here. You're either helping keep people alive or trying to keep yourself alive, and the rest of the world, the NPCs that you come across, will treat you accordingly.
Well, that leads really nicely into my next question of like the stories that we're telling. So got an idea of the kind of characters we're playing, and the world, the magic, the technologies, and how that all blends, like you say. But In the book, and one thing I do want to point out as well, we mentioned it's powered by Shadow of the Demon Lord, but this is a standalone book. So if people haven't played Shadow of the Demon Lord, they can just pick up when the wolf comes and play with this. Is that right?
They can. It's got everything in it. I mean, we kickstarted it a little while ago now. It was August of 22 when we kickstarted it, and I changed publishers last year to Rob to work directly with Rob Schwalb and Schwalb Publishing. So he not so much inherited it, but took it under his umbrella, and so it does have all of his rules. It does have a lot of his input and his gaming guru's input. It is standalone, but it's also a fairly gigantic 400 pages. I think Rob's original books were like 260 something pages, and I just kept going and got carried away. Partly because I wanted to have an adventure in there and a campaign setting in the rule book that would ease people in, because this isn't traditional elves, goblins, sword and sorcery, because it's kind of in people's minds but not fully. I wanted to just give them that lens properly, and an adventure is a great on-ramp to do that.
Absolutely. So yeah, my question I was going to lead into before that tangent of just assuring people that this can be more as it is. So the ready-made adventure that's in the book, obviously you have all the setting information that people can create their own stories and things with all the lore that you've provided. But can you tell us a bit about the kind of ready-made adventure that's already in the book for you?
Yes, it's a starter adventure for level 0 characters to get everyone on board. It's called Nobody Dies in Help Makar, which is a bit of a misnomer, because if it all goes horribly wrong, then everyone can die.
I was about to say, yeah.
but it's I wanted, again, I just like to play with kind of real world settings and real world names, and just shift them into that alternate Norse universe. So the starting point for this adventure was I wanted to do something typically Norse to get people on board. And people who've seen the Norseman comedy series on Netflix, and if you haven't, it's worth a watch. But it starts off with something called the Ættestupa, which is they throw their old people, and by old I mean anyone over 40. They have to jump off a great big cliff to their death because they're no use to society. So I like that.
Okay.
Just interesting way to weed out people, and whether it's whether it's actually something that happened is up for debate. But it's just an interesting idea. Now I matched that with some of the classic things that happen in the Norse sagas. I wanted there to be a lore thing. I wanted the law speaker to stand up and there to be a big legal contest, which is not something that really happens in that many role-playing games. Because that's it might be kind of hard to role play. It's certainly not your kind of sword and sorcery staple, but it is a Norse staple, and I think it's interesting to have repercussions for events. So I just set up this whole scene where someone is forced to go and jump to their death. He doesn't want to go. Chaos ensues, and it ends up with, in a number of different ways. You can go to the deal with it in a kind of law tribunal way and argue your case in front of the judges, or you can deal with it in the traditional Norse sense of Horngang. And Horngang is just a duel to the death. You have to defend your honor. If you draw first blood, then you're away scot-free. So I just wanted to throw in all of these kind of traditional Norse concepts, these archetypes, to get that feeling across that this is a society which very much believed in the law. We talk nowadays about Vikings raping and pillaging and taking monks and seizing the other people's ships and silver, but they were actually a group of very articulate poets who created a rigorous law system, which is arguably the basis of the jury system we use today. The very word law that we have is an Old Norse word. And so, again, this what they used to say, we will, our lands will rise by the law, or die if it fails. They used to say, "We have no king but for the law," and so it's important when you're thinking, "Oh, these Vikings are going to go raping and pillaging." Nope, there's a law that is underpinning all of this. It's very rigid, and if you break it or you act dishonorably, there will be repercussions. You can't easily be a murder hobo in this game because you will get you will have the world turn against you. And so the Nobody Dies in Helpmakar is all about creating the right kind of setting. It's set in the grim north in a kind of parallel Svalbard, which is north of Norway. It starts, it's the first step in this epic campaign called the Thought and Memory Saga. Thought and Memory, Hugin and Munin were Odin's ravens, and this tells the story ultimately of what happens when unwisely people steal Odin's ravens. They strip them from him and use them for their own nefarious purposes. And Nobody Dies in Helpmakar is just the very first step in an 11 adventure campaign that tells that story.
Amazing. So, like, to get GMs, if you're thinking of running this game and running this setting, you have this starter adventure in the book to kind of, get the tone and the setting right, like you say. But do you have any other advice for people looking to run this game to make sure that they introduce the setting and frame it right for their players? Like, some people would hear Vikings and be like, yeah, murder hobo time, but that's not the right sort of thing. Do you have any guidance so that, people running the game can introduce it and make sure that everyone's understanding what kind of stories we're going to be telling?
Well, I mean, the crucial thing to recognize is this is my vision, and how I play the games and how I write things might be different from how other people want to run them. If you want to be a band of berserks who run around seizing monasteries and or the futuristic equivalent, that's absolutely fine. I mean, the very word Viking kind of means pirate, right? So it's not like these were the good guys, and it's not like my Viking empire of the future is this shining beacon of goodness. It's a collapsing Trumpian nightmare facing Ragnarok itself, right? So there's while I do have like this these black and whites, you can jump in and play it however you want. You can be a bunch of marauding Jotnar, you can be some avenging Alpha, you can be some very pissed off Dverga, or any combination of the two. The point is to try and bring those archetypes, to try and do a less hackneyed lens on fantasy. And if you don't like that and you want to bring a goblin over from your Shadow of the Demon Lord game and have him run around with a horned helmet, you go ahead and do that. It's designed to be to be fun. The what I've created with the books and the comics and the novels is a kind of framework to try and make it authentic and believable, because I think that helps at the table. But it shouldn't be a hindrance. And if it becomes a hindrance and people feel, oh, I need to have read there's 2 novels and 4 comics, and you don't, just try and learn a little bit about the Vikings before you jump in, because let's just say that Wagner has a lot to answer for.
Fair enough. Oh, it sounds like the book is going to have plenty of learning and things that you can read in there, so that'll be everything you kind of need. If people want to pick up a copy, where is the best place for them to go online?
So it's on Drive-Thru RPG in PDF form, along with some of the adventures and expansions, like the Space Viking expansion. So you can buy that as a PDF. You can go to my website as well, which is Vikingverse.com. You can see all of the various Vikingverse stuff there. The books are available in various places. They're on Amazon. They're on Drive-Thru as well, Drive-Thru Comics, Drive-Thru Fiction. Schwalb Entertainment.com is also a good, he's got all of the shadow stuff, the shadow of the demon lord, the shadow of the weird wizard that's coming soon.
Mm-hmm.
And then the physical books, and I held one up here, and this is the first
Yes.
one ever off the press,
Dun,
weighing in
dun,
at a
dun.
wonderful £4. The rest are on their way from the printers in China.
Mm-hmm.
They were shipped out of China just before Christmas. They're winging their way to the warehouse, or sailing their way to the warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
They will be available probably in the March timeframe if you want to get your hands on 400 pages of demonic Viking goodness.
Why would you not? Why would you not? And my next question is, and links are in the show notes, those listening to the podcast. And if you're watching, they're also, I just often just put those links in the chat. The future of the range, there's more available, more on the way, I understand as well. Like Space Vikings, for example.
Sure. So Space Vikings. So the Space Vikings as an expansion was something that couldn't, because the book was already 400 pages long.
Yeah.
But I wanted to, again, if you've got these quintessential images in your mind of what Vikings do, well, they went raiding and they sailed everywhere. And I have this notion in the lore, in the background to all of this. Yggdrasil isn't just the world's tree, the central pillar of belief.
Mm-hmm.
It's a literal world-spanning entity with a sentience of its own. It's the equivalent to, to God, because it really exists, and it permeates the worlds, and it allows you to travel between Jotunheim, Midgard, Alfheim, and all of the newer Heimar that I mentioned. So the ships of the Viking pagan present, which is analogous to ours, are perhaps a bit more advanced because Odin has accelerated the timeline. He gave gunpowder to the Vikings during the initial siege of Kiev by the Mongol hordes back in 1284. So he's tinkered with the timelines, he's accelerated things. So by the time you get to the present, those great shipbuilding traditions and innovations of the Norse have led to these star-faring vessels, but also the distances between stars are unimaginable. They are solar sailing ships. They're still powered by sails, not by rockets. If you believe in a sentient world's tree, the lore basically says that it's a bit heretical to be using coal and oil to power rockets. So they shy away from that. It's quite a green society in those senses. So these great they do have these solar sails, but they have this ability to the hyperdrive of this space, the warp drive of this universe is linked to Yggdrasil. It's called staggering. It's kind of this teleportation linked to the tree, and so a bit like Dune has its the Spice Guild who can transport people. There's analogous things here, again drawn from Norse mythology, called steersmen and gapfarers, because we're not talking about space. The Norse called it the yawning void, the primal abyss. It's Gununga Gap. And so that's on screen. You've got their adventures in the Gununga Gap, and that might be a bit of a handful. So we truncated it to Spice Vikings. But I also like the gag as a one-time user of the London Underground. Mind the Gununga Gap, because it's full of all of the kind of eldritch horrors that you might find in a Cthulhu-like universe, because it always was. The Norse painted this picture first. The yawning gap was where all of the horrible things came from.
Well, what a place to adventure in for Space Vikings. It sounds great. Ian, we're coming up to the end of our time. I feel like we could talk about this for literally hours, but I've already taken
That's
close to an hour
mainly
of
because
your
I
time.
talk lots and lots, but
Which is
we'll take
perfect,
time.
which is why you're the perfect guest to come on a podcast and talk, because that's what I need you to do. So it's ideal. Is there anything else, just to wrap up, anything else you want to kind of like summarize or make sure people understand about the game before we go?
No, I think it's interesting having been a creator, started as an author and backed into this. It gives you a lot of control, and I just see this sea of stuff that has not been done in this world before, in the fantasy RPG world that is Vikings, how they were meant to be done, or at least how I think they're meant to be done. And that's the crucial thing. So coming up, there's other expansions. There's more Paths of Honor, Paths of Shame, which a draw from the kind of parallels in Rob's work. I want to bring some more Viking archetypes to the playing table, and I think I've got a good lot of those. And I've started play testing the second campaign with my gaming groups here. So
exciting.
Thought and Memory Saga is most of it is out, and the rest will soon be out, and then there'll be a second campaign soon. So I plan to just devote at least a few years trying to deliver as much mead as possible, mead of poetry for the gamers out there.
Wonderful. That sounds great. And obviously Vikingverse.com is a good place to go to keep up to date with all of that and see all the new things that may be coming out in the future. Ian, thank you so much for coming on and giving up your time to talk to me and for sharing your game with me. One question I ask people before they go is if you have any recommendations for any other tabletop games. Not a game that you've made, because we spent a bit of time talking about your game, and obviously not D&D as well. So do you have any other tabletop RPGs you like playing or that you like the look of?
The most fun we had around the table was with Paranoia.
Yes.
I got Paranoia. I can remember reading the adventures in White Dwarf years and years ago, and played those early versions. And because it was always in my mind as just this hugely fun experience, I saw that they had picked up and kickstarted a new version, and I got hold of that box set probably a couple of years ago now. And it was just it was a shame with that one that there wasn't more material produced, because I think that there's a lot of fun to be had. And then ironically, being a fan of Douglas Adams, being a fan of that the kind of Paranoia secret societies and all of that stuff, I did try and fold in little bits of that into When the Wolf Comes. So some of the crazy cybernetic stuff is and whenever I put in a Dverg, a dwarf, it becomes instinctively humorous, and so some of that Paranoia humor does come into the game. But I do love Paranoia, and I was a big fan of the Expanse game as well, based upon the
I haven't tried the Expanse game.
Yeah, it's again mainly because of that authenticity. The TV show did a great job of making space come alive and be real physics as opposed to pew pew lasers. And I love that. I love the rawness of trying to make it as real and as anchored in reality as possible. And so the Expanse is a good one.
Sounds great. There's two great recommendations there. And if people aren't familiar with Paranoia and would like to know more about it, we have done an episode on that previously, but not the Expanse. So maybe that's an idea for a future guest for me there.
Especially if you can tie it in with the phenomenal novels there as well, because that was another thing that started off with novels, became a TV show. Vikingverse hasn't become a TV show, but if you have any producers, the funny thing is that there's so many Viking things out there. You look on Amazon Prime and you scroll for their movies.
Yeah.
And, oh my God, are they all terrible?
Oh no.
Yeah, just
Well,
next time you're looking for a really bad Viking movie, there's so many of those.
you'll
Someone
be
needs to make a
spoilt for
good one. The
choice.
closest one there was is The Northman.
There we go. Well, there's a recommendation for that as well. All right, Ian, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to let you go. So thanks so much again for coming on. Thank you to everybody that came and watched live and listened to the podcast. All the links to everything we talked about are in the show notes of the podcast, and they're in the chat if you're watching the live stream as well. So thank you very much for coming along. We'll be back same time, same place next week. And next week we are talking about Salvage Union. Jess said, a little delayed because she was looking it up. So we're talking about Salvage Union. So more mech kind of TTRPG fun there for you coming up. But yeah, see you same time, same place next week. Thank you very much. Bye.